2. Around the Weird. Here's your host, the museum curator of the strange and unusual, Mr. Nothing.
Thank you, mysterious voice, and welcome back to Around the Weird, a booktube channel where I talk about all the unusual and out of the ordinary literature that I have found in my travels. Today, I don't want to talk about a book that I read, but rather I want to do a tag video because I was tagged by Lucas over at the Bits of Lit, sort of, but not really. I don't think he said that I should do it in the channel or in the video that he made. He might have, but sometimes I have a tendency to tune him out as he is full of hot air most of the time. But he did tell me to do it in a chat that we have. So I was already going to do it, so here we are. It is the philosophy of reading tag, and as you've seen in my tag videos, I don't do a lot of them, and I have to feel motivated by the questions themselves, and a lot of times the tag video questions are just the same, and I don't want to answer the same questions 100 times for tag videos. But these questions for the philosophy of reading tag seem to be pretty interesting and thought-provoking. So I might have answered them somewhere else, but for the most part, I don't think I've answered them in this for something like this before. So that's what I will do. I think there's a fair amount of questions, so this might be a longer video, and let's get it underway. I will answer the questions, and then we will move on from there. So question 1 is, what's most important? A good character, plot, or message? And I think that's a real tough question, mainly because I feel like all three of those are stuff that I consider the most important when reading, just because characterization is key. Like I want to read about either relatable characters or characters who have a struggle and are going through something and change in some meaningful way. Bad characters make it hard to really enjoy the book. But that said, I feel like the other two elements of plot or message are things that you can build up strong enough that characters maybe don't matter as much. And so characters is fine, but maybe not as essential as plot or message. And I also feel that a message is something really, really necessary for a book. It's what elevates a book from, just good, fun reading to something that's going to stand the test of time. Compare and contrast, I don't know, The Very Hungry Caterpillar to Moby Dick. That feels like a bad example. But one of those has a deep-rooted message, and the other one is an interesting book about metamorphosis. Bad example again, but still, I think that a message is pretty important. But ultimately, I'm going to say the most important thing is plot, because your book doesn't need to have a message, but your book does need to have a very strong plot with interesting twist. Not too many twists, but one or two twists to keep it pretty exciting, and plot details that make sense with the characterization that you've already created. If you make a character do something in your story and it doesn't make a lot of sense, then the plot has essentially been damaged, or has a bad plot has damaged your story in some way. So I think that plot is kind of the most important when it comes to a book. Although I could see you easily making an argument for character and message. So that's why this question was a bit difficult. Number 2 is, should one read books about ideas or opinions they disagree with? And I think to some extent the answer to that is yes. There might be people from different walks of life. For example, if you're a Christian and you don't necessarily agree with the tenets of the Hindu religion, then maybe it might benefit you to read up on what they believe, what Hindus believe, the intricacies of their religion, and that way you can be informed and not simply go around with maybe stereotypes of the religion. And that holds true for many things. But some ideas or opinions are so bad or are nasty that you shouldn't give them you shouldn't entertain the very existence of them. For example, like there's a lot of books written by Nazis or written by white supremacists or people who believe that races or sexes or genders or people of different sexualities are inferior to one another. And then if you buy those books, if you read them, you're just giving money so those authors can go spread their hate elsewhere. Like I'm not going to go out and seek Sarah Palin's book because she is a heartless conservative who believes that gay marriage is wrong. And so like I disagree with that, but I'm not going to expose myself to those ideas because these people are filled with hate and they're not interested in sharing their ideas as they are just spreading them and getting them accepted as something that people should believe. And a lot of these ideas are not stuff that you should believe. So definitely seek out different ideas, but make sure you're seeking out ideas that are, like that come from a good place rather than a place of hate. Question 3 is tech advances. What do you think will be the role of books? That is a good question. I think there always will be physical books, but as tech advances, there will be different ways to, express the ideas of those books. As e-readers became more popular, we got books in ebook format. We also got audiobooks, which started out as cassettes, and now, you have stuff like Audible. I think that will continue to develop as books, books. As technology develops, so will books. That's not, much of a big statement. I think later in the question they talk about downloading books to your mind. I think at one point that might be something you can do, but there's always going to be physical books. Like people will always want physical copies of books for preservation or for any other reasons. So I think as tech advances, you're always going to see physical books, but you're also going to see, technological advancements in how we express the ideas of books. Question 4, how important are summaries, review, and art in your book choosing? Well, I don't mind getting summaries, review, or art in a book. I think art is interesting and it adds to my understanding of the author's original intentions, especially when it comes to graphic novels, but I wouldn't say I go out of my way to choose those books. Oftentimes I like to avoid books that have reviews in them, especially from when you get Shakespeare books, and the intro is always someone talking about what this book means and what Shakespeare was. And the reasons I try to avoid those is a lot of times you get spoilers because I think people presume that you already read the book and that's why you're getting this review copy. It's interesting. I personally don't go out of my way to choose them, but I do like that they are available in case you want something different out of your book. And so question 5 is, should one ever skim or scan a book? And I think that's something you shouldn't really try to do, especially when it comes to fiction, because you're going to miss important pieces and lines. Like if you scan it, you're going to miss the meaning that the author is trying to get. Although sometimes authors, might make it easy enough that you don't have to read every single page. But I feel like you're going to miss something if you skim or scan. That's not to say it's bad or anything. I do that a lot with nonfiction in particular, just because sometimes authors repeat themselves over and over in nonfiction books. And it's like, okay, I got your point. Let's move on to where you're going with this, or move on to your next point. I don't think it's bad. It's just, I think if you do it too often, you run the risk of losing the meaning of the entire book. And there's a question of, did you even read the book? But I realize by saying that, that's sort of like a gatekeeping role right there. So, I think it's up to the reader to choose if that's bad or not. Question 6 is, should reading always be enjoyable? And I think that question is interesting. I don't think reading should be enjoyable, but I do think it should elicit some emotion, because there are a lot of books that are really sad or crushing or something like that. And I would say, wouldn't necessarily enjoyed those books. Like, they didn't elicit a happy feeling with me, but they did elicit an emotional feeling. And I think all books should aspire to do that, because if you didn't feel anything while reading a book, then the author didn't really do anything for you. They didn't. I don't think they truly created art if they're just writing down ideas and those don't elicit any emotions within you. So enjoyability, that remains to be seen. But emotion, creating emotion and instilling emotion within someone, books should always do that. Question 7 is it important to be well read? And I think that one should try to be well read, but there's, my background is in disability services, so I know that it's difficult for some individuals to read, whether it be due to disabilities or the lack of technology available or the lack of libraries in their area, especially in rural areas. So I think someone should try to be well read, but it's definitely understandable if there's something preventing them from being well read. And I do think it might be an elitist view to say that everyone needs to be well read, and you're not worth anything if you don't read books. So that's my opinion there. And then the next question is question 8. What is your book buying process? And I think that is, if I hear that a book is interesting, if it's from an author I know in particular, I'll go out and buy the book. If it's an author that I'm not sure about, or that I'm not 100% on whether or not I want to buy this just yet, I'll go to my library and check it out there. And then if it really strikes me as something good, I'll go out and buy that book later. I've done that with a number of books that I've read in the past, such as Holes and Before I Fall and multiple others. So my book buying process is really try before you buy, just because I don't want to be stuck with a book that I don't like forever, because it's not representative of who I am. Question 9 is in tandem with question 8. What is your reading process? And I think it's just, if I decide that I'm going to make a video about this, I'll write, and then maybe after 50 pages, I'll, write little things about the summary, things I want to talk about, some ideas that I'm noticing here and there, some quotes that I might have picked up on that I might want to share, stuff like that. Alternatively, if like 50 pages and I find that this book is kind of boring or there's not a lot to talk about, I will I'll set my notebook down and I'll just read the book, and I'll be like, okay, I guess I'm not making a video about this or something like that. And so, I'll stop every so often and reflect, like, what did I just read? I'll do that regardless of whether I'm going to talk about the book, just because it's important to reflect on what you're reading and not just, consume it. See if the author is trying to say something and how well it's holding up. How are you feeling while you're reading it? I mean, it's always important to check in with yourself. And that's my reading process right there. Question 10 is, how do you use what you read? Well, if it's nonfiction, I try to apply what I've read to, just my day-to-day interactions with people, my activism that I do, my own work that I do, especially if I read books that are focused on assistive technology and disability services areas of my work. Otherwise, if it's more or if it's more fictional, maybe I'll, talk about what I read to people in conversation, but I can't see A Wish in the Dark really ever coming up in conversation. Besides, if people are like, did you read any good books lately? Then I can talk about it. Or maybe if some people are talking about, various ideas, I can be like, oh, I read a book called A Wish in the Dark where the author talked about yada, 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 and we can have a discussion about those sort of things. So maybe conversation starters too. It really depends on the genre of book and I guess whether or not it's fiction or nonfiction, how that brings up. But I do try to use what I've read in my in that way, just so that I can show that it's affected me in some way. Question 11: if you could download a book to your brain, would you still read? And to be honest, I don't think I would ever get the device that allows you to download books to your brain in my head. It seems like a weird technology, and also there doesn't seem to be an actual substitute to physically opening a book. If I could download a book to my brain, like how would that change how I feel about books? Because there's a difference between reading a book like wholes and going through all the twists and turns and experiencing the emotions, and then having that book like just downloaded to your brain. What would that look like? Like, would you still experience those twists or turns, or would you just have the knowledge of what Holes is about in your head? I think it'd probably be the latter there, and it wouldn't be nearly as interesting. So I think I would always, no matter what, always still open a book, because that's an experience that can't be matched by really anything. Question 12 is, what are your views on rereading a book? I think that you should definitely do that, just because in a lot of books there might be some ideas that you missed the first time, but also not every book needs to be reread. There are plenty of books like the Princess Diaries series, for example, that I don't think you really need to reread. But there are a lot more complex, more thought-provoking books, like A Wish in the Dark, which I just read. I'll probably revisit that later. I reread Holes a number of times. I reread World War Z a number of times, just because they have a lot of ideas and there's a lot of enjoyment, and I always see these books from a different perspective each time I reread it. So I'm definitely pro rereading, just because there's always a chance to gain something new with each subsequent reread, and maybe it's good to just refresh yourself on these ideas, especially if you may have forgotten them since your last read. Question 13 is, what makes a book good? And that is a really good question. I think it goes back to question 1. Like, you need a good characters, you need a good plot, you need a strong message in order to really tie it all together. You need to be consistent with your themes, and most importantly, in my opinion, you need an author who's very passionate about what they're writing. You can always tell in the prose if an author actually enjoys what they're writing, or if this is just a struggle for them. And so all those elements need to be working in tandem, and that's what makes a book good, at least in my opinion. I'm sure you go through this tag video from other people, they'll tell you different things, but that's usually how I grade a book, in my opinion, letting you see behind the scenes on Around the Weird over here. And 14 is connected to 13, and what makes a book bad. And I feel like that could be a lot of factors, everything I just listed. For example, if the plot is vague or just meanders sometimes, or if it's a graphic novel, like the art is bad, or if characters are killed for no valid reason, and it's meant as purely shock value, if the characters are ill-defined, if the book has a weird message. Like, a book could have a message, but it could be a really dumb message, or it could be a message that's inconsistent with reality. That was my problem with The Firekeeper's Daughter, where one of the issues seemed to be that Donis in the story was working with the FBI, and I think that no matter how angry she would have been in the story about finding out who killed her best friend, I don't think she ever would have worked with the FBI, given the history of native experience with federal law enforcement. And so like weird messages that pop up in the story. And I think it's very easy to make a bad book. You just got to get any one thing wrong, and then it sort of all collapses. And it's very easy to for your good book to collapse in on itself too, because you can get everything right, and then just one thing goes wrong, and they don't connect anymore. So very interesting ideas, and worth exploring more in a little more detail in perhaps another video. Question 15, how do you feel about not finishing a book at all? Because I'm a bit of a completionist, I think it's important to try to finish every book that you read, but I can understand not finishing a book. Sometimes the writing is just bad. Sometimes books can be insulting, or the author could just drone on and on and on, and you don't want to finish the book. And it's fine if you don't want to finish a book. it's up to the author to really keep you hooked into a book. And if you don't finish the book, that's more reflective of a failure on the author's part. So it's not a crime not to finish a book. I personally think that if I start one, I need to finish it. But I only say that because I haven't encountered too many books that have made me just want to drop it and throw it out a window, beyond Stephen King, of course. Question 16 is, should the author's personal life matter at all? And I believe absolutely yes, it should. If the author is writing about very progressive ideas, but they themselves are a regressive monster who believes in hindering the rights of the very people they are writing about, then that feels inauthentic in my opinion, and we should definitely consider the author's life. If the author is a monster, it doesn't matter if they created great art. That art is created by a monster. There are many people who say you can separate the art from the artist, and I disagree with that fully. I believe we should always remember who is writing what, and keep that in mind as we're reading. Like, there's a lot of dead authors who are bad people, and there's nothing we can do about that now. We should still remember what they did, and let it guide our understanding of their reading, so that we don't try to attribute anything that's positive to them, even though they were terrible people. And there's a lot of current writers who are trying to angle themselves as decent people, even though it's clear that they're not decent people. And giving them any credit for that feels invalid, feels a little untruthful and hurtful to the communities that they are oppressing. And so, you might have guessed I'm probably talking about J.K. Rowling, but so many other people in the process. And we should definitely remember the author's personal life. That's one thing I feel very strongly about. Question 17, if you could read only one genre for the rest of time, what would it be? Not for the rest of my life, but for the rest of time? Wow, that's interesting. That implies that I'm going to read even after I'm dead. But I would say sprawling family epics, something like East of Eden for the rest of my life. Multi-generational family stories where we see, family after family, or like generation after generation, trying to get out of the issues that each generation is facing. I feel like there's a lot of themes that could be explored with this, and depending on the author, you get some pretty fantastic writing. I really like that particular genre, even if I don't get a chance all the time to explore that particular genre, especially on this channel. But yeah, I feel like that's what I want to do if I could just read only one genre for the rest of forever. Question 18, do you ever read a book without knowing anything about it? Yeah, I would say that happens fairly often. If you're familiar with my random library reads on this channel, you know that I sometimes read books that I'd pick out randomly from the library, and I might read some of the synopsis just to make sure that it's unusual and fits with the theme of this channel. But for the most part, I don't know what I'm getting into. And I actually prefer it that way, just because if I go in with an opinion of it, or knowing something about maybe what's going to be in there, I might expect or hope for the book to be one way, and then if it's not that way, I'll disappoint myself, unfortunately. So I found it's best to go in without an understanding of what's in the book. But it doesn't. It's not something that I only want to do. Sometimes people say, "Oh, you should read this book. It's about these ideas," and I'll be like, "Okay, I'll do that," and it's just as good. So, question 19: what author, genre, series, or culture can you just not get into, and why? I think one of the answers there is Stephen King, and that's just because I don't like his writing. It's very frustrating. He writes in vernacular and native to the region he's from, and he makes horror kind of boring at times, in my opinion, or tiresome. And then another answer to that is fantasy. It's really hard to get into any fantasy series just because each series is its own world. So it's constantly learning the rules of this entire world, and it takes up a lot of the books. And so even though I'd much rather be reading about what's going on in these worlds, instead they're spending a significant chunk of time telling me how the magic works or telling me, the lineage of each character. And that might be interesting for some people, but it's mostly boring for me. And so, like, it was one of the reasons I was afraid to read The Lord of the Rings the whole time. But I feel like Tolkien does a good job of blending the lineage and the history of these worlds with the story itself. So there's few problems there. And that might be the case for other fantasy books, but I guess I'm just too, hesitant to read those series. Question 20, do you think everyone should read and why? I feel like that's similar to the question about people being well read. And to that, I would say everyone should try to read, whether it be through using assistive technology or trying to read on their own. There should be an effort made if possible. But again, disability exists. People are low vision, people have ADHD, people struggle with cognitive disabilities, you name it. I do believe that people should try to read and learn about new ideas and aspire to see the world from a broader perspective. But that's not the case for everyone. And so I think it's okay to if you can't read or if you don't want to read, but there should be an effort made somewhere. Like seek out these new ideas, if not through reading, then through other means, at least in my opinion. And those are my answers to the philosophy of reading tag, a pretty fun tag. Lots of interesting questions about reading itself and very tough questions to answer too, stuff that I think about a lot, especially when I make my reviews, like do I talk about the characters? Do I talk about the message? I feel like if I put too much emphasis on the message and I'm not putting enough on the characters, it's a lot of fun to make these kind of videos and to talk about these sorts of things. I urge you to make the same type of video, or at least comment in the comments below. If you disagree with something, if you agree with something, let me know what you think. Otherwise, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so that more people can find out about this tag and do it. And until then, I wish you the best of travels in your weird and philosophical travels. Farewell.